I could smell the whiskey on his breath as he stumbled through the door at 3 a.m. This was the final straw. The drinking, the unexplained absences, the constant lies. After 12 years of marriage, I knew deep down that Paul was having an affair. As he collapsed onto the couch, I stood there trembling with rage. "Where the hell have you been?" I demanded, my voice shaking. Paul looked up at me with bleary eyes. "Working late," he slurred unconvincingly. "You know how it is, babe. Big project," I scoffed. "Don't insult my intelligence, Paul. I'm not an idiot." I could feel the anger boiling inside me, threatening to explode. "I know you've been cheating on me." He sat up, suddenly more alert. "What? That's ridiculous, Tara. I would never." "Save it." I cut him off. "I hired a private investigator. I have proof of your affair with Amber, that little tramp from your office." Paul's face drained of color. For a moment, he looked like a deer caught in headlights. Then his expression hardened. "Well, if you knew, why didn't you say anything sooner?" "Are you kidding me?" I cried. "I wanted to give you a chance to come clean, to save what's left of our marriage." He shook his head slowly. "There's nothing left to save, Tara. I want a divorce." Those 4 words felt like a punch to the gut, knocking the wind out of me. "What?" "I'm leaving you for Amber," he said flatly. "She's pregnant and we're going to raise our child together like a real family." My vision blurred with tears as his cruel words sank in. "After everything I've sacrificed for you, for us, this is how you repay me?" Paul stood up, swaying slightly. "Face it, Tara. You've become obsessed with your work. All you care about is selling houses and making money. Well, I want more than that out of life." I stared at him in disbelief. The man I had loved, the man I had built a life with, was nothing but a selfish, lying coward. In that moment, I felt something inside me snap. "Get out," I said, my voice trembling with barely contained fury. "Get out of my house, you piece of garbage." As he stumbled towards the door, I hurled the nearest object, a glass vase, at his head. It shattered against the wall, missing him by inches. "You'll regret this, Paul," I screamed after him. "I swear to God, you'll pay for what you've done to me." The door slammed behind him, and I collapsed to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. My life as I knew it was over, but this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of my revenge. A week after Paul's drunken confession and abrupt departure, I was still reeling from the betrayal. How could the man I loved, the man I had devoted over a decade of my life to, treat me with such callous disregard? As I sat staring blankly at the divorce papers in front of me, the anger and hurt threatened to consume me once again. The sharp ring of the doorbell jolted me from my thoughts. I opened it to find a stern-looking man in a crisp suit holding a manila envelope. "Mrs. Williams?" he asked gruffly. "I'm John Malone, the private investigator you hired." I ushered him inside, my heart pounding. "Please call me Tara. Did you find anything?" Malone nodded solemnly and handed me the envelope. "I'm afraid the news isn't good, ma'am. Your husband has been having an affair for quite some time now with this woman." He pulled out a sheaf of incriminating photos showing Paul in intimate embraces with a gorgeous raven-haired beauty. My stomach turned as I flipped through the images. "That's Amber Stevenson," I choked out. "His coworker at the firm." "That's correct," Malone confirmed. "I tailed them for weeks. They're shacked up together in a downtown loft. She's pregnant with his child." White-hot rage flooded my veins as the pieces fell into place. Paul's lies, his late nights, his sudden coldness towards me. It all made sense now. I was married to a cheating, spineless bastard. "Thank you for your services, Mr. Malone," I said tightly, handing back the envelope. "You've given me all the proof I need." That night, I waited for Paul to come crawling back. When he finally slunk in around midnight, I was ready. "You lying sack of shit," I screamed, hurling the divorce papers at his face. "I know all about your whore and your bastard child." Paul recoiled, eyes widening in shock and fear. "Tara, baby, let me explain." "Explain what?" I spat. "How you've been sticking your dick in that little slut for God knows how long. How you got her pregnant while lying to my face every single day." His expression hardened. "Don't act so innocent. You became so obsessed with work, never making time for me or for us to start a family. What did you expect would happen?" The sheer audacity of his words left me speechless for a moment. "Are you seriously trying to blame me for your infidelity? You're unbelievable." "I want a divorce, Tara," he said flatly. "It's over between us. I laughed bitterly. Don't worry, you'll get your precious divorce, and I'll take you for every last penny you're worth, you piece of trash. As Paul stormed out, I knew our separation was going to get very, very messy. But I didn't care. I was going to make him pay for ripping my heart out. This was just the beginning of his downfall. The divorce proceedings were even more acrimonious than I could have imagined. Paul fought me tooth and nail over every single asset, adamant that he wasn't going to let me take him to the cleaners. His smug arrogance throughout the whole process was utterly infuriating. You think you're entitled to half of everything I've earned? He sneered during one particularly heated meeting with our lawyers. You're delusional, Tara. I built that wealth, not you. I clenched my fists, struggling to maintain my composure. We were partners, you selfish prick. I sacrificed just as much as you did to make this life together. Please, he scoffed. All you did was sell a few houses here and there. Don't act like you contributed equally. My lawyer had to physically restrain me from lunging across the table at him. How dare he diminish and devalue all the hard work I'd put in over the years. In the end, the judge awarded me just under half of our combined assets and savings, a surprisingly merciful ruling, considering Paul's reputation and clout. But it still stung to watch him walk away with millions, knowing he was going to use that money to start over with his pregnant mistress. On the day we finalized and signed the divorce papers, I couldn't even look at Paul. He tried to catch my eye, a sickening smirk playing on his lips. No hard feelings, Tara, he said in that patronizing tone I'd grown to despise. I hope you can finally find some happiness, now that we're free of each other. I wanted so badly to spit in his face, but I restrained myself. Maintaining my dignity was the only shred of control I had left. As he turned to leave the lawyer's office, he paused. Oh, and one more thing. Don't even think about coming after my company or trying to sabotage my career. You'll regret it. The arrogant prick actually thought he could threaten me. I forced a sickly sweet smile. Don't worry, Paul. You and your little family are nothing to me now. I'm just going to move on with my life. His eyes narrowed suspiciously, but he didn't respond. With a curt nod, he was gone, vanishing back into his shiny new life with Amber. I was left to pick up the pieces of my shattered world. Those first few months after the divorce were some of the darkest of my life. My comfortable home and luxurious lifestyle were gone in an instant, replaced by a cramped rental apartment and the harsh reality of my dwindling finances. While Paul got to play house with his pregnant mistress, I was struggling just to keep a roof over my head, but through it all, the flames of resentment burned brighter than ever before. Paul thought he could just discard me and move on to his fairy tale ending. He was sorely mistaken. I was going to rebuild from the ashes he left me in, and then I would make him pay for every ounce of pain and humiliation he'd put me through. Revenge was all I had left to live for, and I would stop at nothing until Paul's perfect new world came crashing down around him. 2 years had passed since the divorce, and I had slowly but surely rebuilt my life and career. Scoring a coveted real estate agent position at a prestigious firm, I worked tirelessly to regain my financial footing. The sting of Paul's betrayal still lingered, but I channeled all my pain into an unwavering determination to succeed. I was hosting an open house one sunny Saturday afternoon when I heard an unmistakable voice from behind me. Well, if it isn't Tara Williams herself, slumming it as a lowly realtor, I see. I spun around to see Paul standing there, arm wrapped possessively around a very pregnant Amber's waist. They both wore insufferable smirks, clearly reveling in my humbled circumstances. Paul, I said tightly, struggling to keep my tone neutral. Fancy running into you here. My firm is building a development just down the street, he explained with a cruel smile. We were in the neighborhood and I simply had to come see how the ex-wife was doing. Amber simpered beside him. Yes, we were so curious to catch a glimpse of Tara's sad, pathetic little life. The arrogant bitch looked even more smug and superior than I remembered. I wanted nothing more than to slap that sneer right off her pretty face. I'm doing just fine, thanks for asking, I replied coolly. In fact, business is booming. I can't complain. Paul chuckled derisively. If you say so, dear, although from where I'm standing, it looks like you've really let yourself go since we split. He raked his eyes over me in an overtly demeaning way. My skin crawled with disgust and fury, but I refused to show any weakness. At least I have my self-respect intact, I shot back. More than I can say for you two. Amber's perfectly plucked eyebrows shot up in mock offense. Why, Tara, what a dreadfully rude thing to say. Yeah, we're just living our lives and enjoying our happiness, Paul sneered. No need to be such a bitter, jealous hag about it. That arrogant, condescending tone. God, how I despised him in that moment. I opened my mouth to deliver a scathing retort, but the sudden wail of a newborn pierced the air. Oh dear, that's our little Liam, Amber cooed, rubbing her bulging belly. We simply must get going. Babies, you know. With one last contemptuous look in my direction, the smug cow turned on her heel and waddled away. Paul lingered behind, his expression a sickening mix of pity and derision. Don't worry, Tara, he said in that patronizing tone. Maybe you'll find some lonely, desperate loser to start over with someday. If you're really lucky, that is. Then he was gone, leaving me trembling with a potent cocktail of rage, humiliation, and hatred. In that moment, I made a vow to whatever cruel deity was out there. I would not rest until I had risen back to the top and crushed Paul's perfect world into dust beneath my heels. No matter what it took, no matter how long I had to wait, I would make them pay for their arrogance. Revenge would be mine. That fateful encounter with Paul and Amber lit a fire under me like never before. I could no longer stomach the thought of working for someone else, forced to grovel and debase myself just to get by. If I was going to rise back to the top, it would be on my own terms. The very next day, I marched into my boss's office and resigned on the spot, much to his sputtering shock. Then I immediately cashed out what little savings I had left and used it as a down payment to start my own boutique real estate firm. It was an immense risk. Some might even call it reckless or foolish. But I was fueled by an almost maniacal drive, a burning need to rebuild my wealth and status. Sleepless nights were the norm as I poured every ounce of my energy into getting the business off the ground. Within a year, my firm had already made a serious name for itself. My ruthless ambition and cutthroat tactics quickly earned me a reputation as someone not to be trifled with. Selling multi-million-dollar properties to LA's elite became my specialty. On the rare nights I allowed myself a break, I would sometimes catch glimpses of Paul's smug face on the news or in real estate trade publications, gloating about his latest big development deal. Each time it filled me with white-hot rage. That arrogant prick was going to get his eventual comeuppance. As the years ticked by, my success only grew more stratospheric. I was a real estate mogul in my own right, heading a boutique firm that the rich and powerful were clamoring to work with. Designer clothes, luxury cars, a sprawling mansion, I reclaimed every trapping of wealth Paul had so callously ripped away from me. Yet through it all, that insatiable thirst for vengeance never waned. I knew Paul's ego wouldn't allow him to ignore my meteoric rise for much longer. I could hardly wait for the day he would inevitably try to encroach on my territory again. That day came about 5 years after our disastrous divorce. I was doing a walkthrough of one of my firm's premium listings, a $25 million Beverly Hills estate, when my assistant burst in, eyes wide. "Miss Williams, your ex-husband is here, and he's not alone," she said breathlessly. I steeled myself, hands clenching into fists at my sides. "Send them in." Moments later, Paul and Amber swept into the room, toddler son Liam in tow. I barely recognized the miserable, bloated creature that was now Amber. Her formerly lithe figure was thickened with baby weight she'd never lost. "Well, well," Paul said with a nasty grin. "If it isn't little Miss Tara Williams herself, playing house with her precious real estate toys." I arched an eyebrow coolly. "I see you're still as charming as ever, Paul. To what do I owe this? Pleasure?" "We're in the market for a new home," Amber piped up in a shrill, grating voice. "Only the finest place will do for us, of course." She smirked at me, daring me to challenge her. I forced a sickly sweet smile. "Of course, Mrs. Williams. I'd be delighted to assist you in finding suitable accommodations." Paul's grin faltered ever so slightly at my use of Amber's married name. The bitch looked taken aback for a moment before recovering her composure. "Yes, well, we'll require a property that adequately reflects our status," she sniffed. "Old money status, not some gaudy nouveau rich nonsense." My smile remained plastered on, even as my blood boiled. But of course, I have just the place in mind. As I led them through the opulent estate, I couldn't resist needling them further. You'll notice the his and hers walk-in closets, perfect for housing a busy couple's wardrobes, and the kitchen is equipped with only the finest professional-grade appliances, more than enough space for a personal chef, should you require one. Paul shot me a scathing look, clearly nettled by my not-so-subtle digs at their obvious lack of household staff. Amber, however, remained obliviously imperious. "It's a bit ostentatious for my tastes," she sniffed. "I prefer a more refined, understated elegance." The smug dismissal was the final straw. I whirled on the miserable cow, all traces of politeness evaporating. "Listen here, you pretentious, deluded little bitch." My tirade was just beginning. By the time I was done, they would know the true depths of my wrath, and the steep price they would pay for their arrogance. 5 more years passed in what felt like the blink of an eye. My real estate empire had grown exponentially, cementing my status as one of the most powerful players in the Los Angeles market. Opulent mansion after opulent mansion, I was the broker the stars. Actors, musicians, CEOs, anyone who was anyone came through my firm to find their dream home. I was doing a site visit at a newly constructed $40 million Bel Air estate when my assistant urgently waved me over. "Miss Williams, you're not going to believe who just walked in," she murmured, eyes wide. I followed her gaze to the front door, where a very different-looking Paul stood with his now teenage son, Liam. The years had not been kind. Paul's face was puffy and lined, his gut straining against his ill-fitting suit. Even Liam looked deeply uncomfortable, like he wanted to be anywhere but here. I plastered on a sugary smile and strode over. "Why, Paul Williams, what an unexpected surprise," I trilled in saccharine tones. "To what do I owe this honor?" His eyes narrowed as he took in the opulence surrounding us. "Tara, you're looking, well, I can't say the same for you, I'm afraid." I tutted mockingly. "Put on a few pounds, have we?" A dull flush crept up his neck, but he seemed to rein in his temper with visible effort. "My firm is in a bit of financial trouble," he said stiffly. "I was hoping you might throw a few premium listings my way." I barked out a laugh. "You? Asking me for handouts? That's rich, even for you." "I'm serious, Tara," he snapped. "I need this. My company is on the verge of bankruptcy, and if that happens—" He trailed off, looking almost ashamed. Good, he deserved to feel the bitter sting of humiliation, just as I once had. Well, well. I shook my head in mock sympathy. How the mighty have fallen. Whatever happened to all that bluster about building an empire, Paul? Not so easy as it looked, His face purpled with rage and embarrassment. "You think you can just mock me? I built this whole goddamn city while you were playing house, Tara. And yet here you are, hat in hand, begging me for scraps." I tsked again. "For someone of such supposed status and class, you're awfully pathetic these days." Liam shifted uncomfortably beside his father, but Paul seemed not to notice. He was well and truly unraveled now. "You smug bitch," he hissed. "After everything I've done for this city, for this industry." "Oh, get over yourself," I cut him off with a cruel laugh. "Face it, Paul, you're a washed-up, arrogant has-been. A failure of a father, a failure of a husband, just a failure, period." He recoiled like I'd struck him. For a long moment he could only gape at me, stunned into silence. Then another voice broke through the tension. "Is everything okay here?" We all turned to see Amber standing in the doorway, perfectly coiffed as always. Though her lithe figure had returned, her pretty face was more lined and haggard than I remembered. Paul seemed to regain some of his bravado, puffing out his chest imperiously. "Everything's fine, dear. Just catching up with an old friend." Amber's eyes narrowed shrewdly as she took in the scene. "I see. Well, as fun as that sounds, we really must be going. We have that thing, remember?" "Yes, right, of course." Paul shot me one last venomous glare before turning on his heel. "Good seeing you, Tara." As they turned to leave, I couldn't resist one final parting shot. "By the way, Amber," I called out sweetly, "I couldn't help but notice your husband's assistant is quite the looker. You may want to keep closer tabs if you know what I mean." Paul froze in his tracks, but Amber simply arched one perfectly groomed eyebrow. "Why, Tara, whatever do you mean?" I gave her a sickly smile. "Oh, nothing at all. Just a friendly word of advice from one woman to another." Amber's eyes flashed dangerously for a moment, but she quickly regained her composure. "How considerate of you. she said tightly. We'll be sure to keep that in mind. As they finally exited, I felt a rush of vindictive satisfaction. The tables had well and truly turned. Paul was a broken, bitter shell of a man, while I was richer and more powerful than ever before. But more importantly, I now had the perfect way to begin dismantling Amber's delusional world, just as she'd once tried to dismantle mine. The bitch's downfall was going to be slow, agonizing, and utterly deserved. A few weeks after that deliciously satisfying encounter with Paul and Amber, I was shopping at an upscale mall when I spotted a familiar figure browsing the boutiques. It was Amber, perfectly put together, as always, in designer clothes and towering heels. I couldn't resist the opportunity to continue needling her. "Well, hello there," I called out in saccharine tones as I approached. "Fancy running into you here." Amber whirled around, her perfectly glossed lips curling into a sneer when she saw me. "Tara, what an unpleasant surprise." "No need for hostilities," I said with a sickly smile. "I was simply admiring your outfit. You always did have impeccable taste." Her expression soured even further as she eyed me up and down. "I could say the same for you, I suppose, if you're into the aging socialite look." I let out a tinkling laugh. My, such claws! What would the ladies who lunch say about such catty behavior? Amber opened her mouth, no doubt to unleash another biting retort, but her gaze suddenly slid past me. Her eyes went wide with shock and horror. Turning, I saw what had rendered her speechless. Her precious son Liam, now 16, in a heated lip lock with another teenage boy. They were utterly oblivious to our presence, hands roaming shamelessly. "Well," I murmured, "isn't that an interesting development?" "You bitch!" Amber exploded, rounding on me with undisguised fury. "You put him up to this, didn't you? Just to humiliate me." I blinked innocently. "Me? Why, I have no idea what you're talking about. Liam is simply exploring his sexuality, it seems." "Don't play dumb," she raged. "This has to be another one of your twisted revenge schemes." By now, the commotion had drawn Liam's attention. He broke off his embrace, looking mortified when he spotted us. "Mom? What's going on? What's going on?" Amber wheeled on him, eyes blazing. "What's going on is that you've somehow been perverted into this." She waved a shaking hand at the bewildered boy beside him. Liam's expression hardened. "Perverted? Are you kidding me?" He laughed bitterly. "For your information, Mom, I'm gay. Have been for years, not that you or Dad ever noticed through your self-absorbed bubbles." Amber recoiled like she'd been slapped. For once, the smug bitch seemed genuinely shaken. But how?" she sputtered helplessly. "We raised you right, gave you everything. How could you be one of those?" Liam's face twisted with disgust. "Wow, you really are a narrow-minded bigot, aren't you?" He shook his head slowly, then turned to his friend with a resigned sigh. "Come on, Jake. Let's get out of here before my backwards-ass family gives us both brain cancer." As the two boys stalked off, I couldn't resist one final twist of the knife. "Well, Amber," I said sweetly, "it looks like your dream family isn't quite as perfect as you thought, hmm?" She opened and closed her mouth, seemingly unable to formulate a response. For once, the infuriatingly smug woman was utterly at a loss. "Oh, and one more thing. I went for the kill. I recently adopted 2 beautiful children, a son and a daughter. They're just the most delightful, well-adjusted kids." I let that sink in for a moment before delivering the final blow. "Don't worry, though. I would never judge you for your parenting struggles. We can't all be cut out for motherhood, I suppose." With that, I turned and sashayed away, leaving Amber gaping after me in stunned silence. I could practically feel the roiling storm of humiliation and anguish rolling off her in waves. As I slid into my car, a grin slowly spread across my face. Karma really was a beautiful thing to behold. After everything that miserable bitch had put me through, it was only fitting that I was the one to tear her delusional fairy tale world to shreds, and I was just getting started. The best was yet to come for poor, pathetic Amber. In the aftermath of destroying Amber's delusional world, I should have felt vindicated, satisfied, at peace, even. But the truth was, I still burned with an insatiable desire to make them pay, to utterly decimate Paul and Amber until nothing remained. So you can imagine my immense gratification when, a few months later, I caught wind of some deliciously karmic news. I was in my home office going over quarterly earnings reports when my assistant buzzed through. "Miss Williams? There's someone here to see you. Says it's urgent." I frowned. "Who is it?" "Mr. Paul Williams?" My eyebrows shot up. What could that weasel possibly want now? Send him in, I replied coolly. Moments later, Paul shuffled into the room, looking more haggard and miserable than ever before. His suit hung loosely on his frame, his hairline was rapidly receding, and his eyes were rimmed with dark circles and hopelessness. Well, well, I said, leaning back in my chair. If it isn't the great Paul Williams himself, slumming it in my humble abode, to what do I owe this pleasure? He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Clearing his throat roughly, he tried again. I need your help, Tara. I arched an eyebrow mockingly. Is that so? The mighty have fallen even further, I see. A muscle ticked in his jaw, but he seemed to force himself to remain calm and impassive. My company? It's gone under. I've lost everything, the business, our home, all our assets. He trailed off miserably. I had to resist the urge to throw back my head and cackle. This was even better than I could have hoped. How